jobs, the United States added 50 individuals to the rarefied range of billionaire. So we now have among us 664 individuals whose wealth has hit the 10-figure mark. Kind of hard to take all that in. Anyway, and it was hard for us back in 2015 to kind of get that in our heads. Ben and I talked about what this income gap means to us as citizens of this country, its costs to individual lives, to communities, and to democracy. And, you know, the problem just seemed huge and amorphous, just sort of beyond imagining. But then we started thinking about poems about money and jobs and food stamps and recessions and gentrification and global supply chains. Yes, there are poems about such things, and local farm stands. And we, as we talked about these poems that we knew of, and many by writers we admired, by poets we admired, it struck us that these poems really laid bare the human stakes of these facts in a way that the facts don't, that they really made us not only feel, as all good poems do, but feel whole truths about these realities. So having ordered a second round of tea, we decided we ought to put together an anthology of those poems that we were discussing, those poems that kind of brought to life those kind of dry and overwhelming data. Our hope was and is that readers of our collection would better understand the many complex ways that capital shapes American lives. So now I'm going to turn the virtual microphone over to Ben to complete the story.
Hey, all, thank you so much for tuning in tonight to listen to our great readers. I'm just going to say a few words about the anthology itself, which I don't know if you all have seen the cover. It's beautiful. So if you really want to understand the shape of something, its complexity and its textures, go see what the poets have to say. That's from our introduction. So we wanted to curate an anthology to do just that, to see what the poets have to say. But the question we ran into really quickly is how to formulate such a project. What would it actually look like? Of course, we wanted a range of voices, people of many different backgrounds across gender, race, class, sexual orientation, age, region of the country, in seeking to represent as much of the contemporary experience with money as possible. That range seemed especially important, as our experience of capital is so often inflected through such categories, though we did have trouble finding any super wealthy poets to represent the billionaire demographic. And we chose to include only contemporary poets in order to keep our focus as far as possible on this moment, for all the reasons Claire just cited. The 44 poets in the Poetry of Capital were selected both by invitation and by an open call for submissions, about 50-50, again, to be true as far as possible to the American experience of capital, not only because we wanted to discover voices, but also because factors like notoriety too inflect our experience of money. So we have poets who have won Pulitzers here tonight. And we also have poets in the anthology who have yet to publish a first book or have only recently published a first book. And we wanted to balance this range of representation with a depth of representation, as far as possible to look both far out and in deep. So we limited the number of poets, choosing instead to include multiple poems or one longer poem by each, to give readers a sense of larger projects, to come closer to representing who we are. In keeping with this humanist strategy, we also ask these poets to step out from behind their work in original prose statements, to ruminate on money and poetry in any way they saw fit. And the statements are wonderful. Some provide intimate biographical context, others complex rumination, and others are as rich with lyric discovery as poems themselves. They alone are a great reason to buy the book. But the best reason to buy the book, of course, is the excellent poems. And now it's time for us to hear some of those. We are really delighted, a little gobsmacked and delighted, I think, to have such an excellent lineup for tonight. And I'm going to introduce our first reader, Alan Cesaro. Alan is the author of This Is Not a Frank Ocean Cover Album, a hilarious title, from Black Lawrence Press, and Pinata Theory, also from Black Lawrence. A Lawrence Ferlinghetti Scholar from the University of San Francisco. His poems have appeared in Ninth Letter, San Francisco Chronicle, Puerto del Sol, and Iron Horse Review. Please help me welcome Alan.
Let's see, let's get this unmuting for Alan. Here you go. There you go, Alan.
All right, word. Thank you. I was trying to unmute and it was like, you can't unmute.
No, okay, yeah, this is an Orwellian. I will make sure everyone's unmuted.
No, it's good. I'm first to bat, so it was bound to happen. Just want to say thank you to Benjamin, to Claire for editing this amazing anthology that I got the honor and privilege to be a part of, to McNally Jackson for making sure that we can speak off mute. And to the poets I'm reading with, every single one of you have been influential, not only for me, but for many in my generation. And I'm always thankful for those that built the road, before us. So it's really an honor for me to be here with you all right now. And shout out my mom, who's also here. So I'm going to read the poems that are in this anthology. I come from the Bay Area, born and raised. My parents were both Mexican immigrants, and I tend to write a lot about those communities that I'm a part of. The first poem is called El Paletero's Song. Each flame-throwing summer, we'd stay in a pool of air-conditioned cool until he called, "Paletas!" His voice, the graffiti braiding fences around our neighborhood. "Tengo paletas!" Sugar melody rising above noises from the nearby freeway. "Paletas de piña!" Our ice cream man, wheeling what we wanted across sticky pavement. "Paletas de limón!" Handcart plastered with pictures of Spider-Man popsicles with blue gumballs for eyes. "Paletas de cacahuate!" Chased around street corners by little ones, kids with missing teeth. "Paletas de fresa!" Handing out fruit pops in exchange for smiles and crinkled dollar bills. "Paletas de tamarindo!" Bundling his money in back pocket with rubber bands because no one else carried his interest. "Paletas de arroz!" Stopping only to wipe sweat off his sun-glazed brow before pushing on. "Paletas de mango!" A cowboy in leather boots circling suburban blocks until he gathered enough savings. "Paletas!" Who showed us photos of his family in Jalisco, 3 boys and a wife he left behind. I miss the Paletero. My area, honestly, in the Bay has been so gentrified in San Francisco that I don't even see people like that in my neighborhood anymore. That was when I was younger. So it's kind of an ode to that time when I could walk out and there was dudes pushing carts and then just give him $1 and he gives you a paleta, right? But it's harder and harder for folks like that to live in these areas, as Claire and Benjamin were referring to in their intro. This is my last poem. It's the other poem in the anthology. It's called The Cowboy Shirts. He was secreted north so he could own a Chevy and drive over paved roads. To his wife and 5 kids in Mexico, he flickered until fading. Nothing but his side of the mattress and some extra plates to remind them a father once lived there. In California, he worked under the table, a cash-only laborer. He married our grandma, an American native. Her skin is dark and leathery as a bargain purse. He didn't speak English, didn't know what his name meant. Fortunado, a borracho, could build a wall a week after he tore the old ones down, and a gambler, out late nights with the guys in the back shed, smoking and singing and pissing on grass he mowed that afternoon. Mornings, he would stumble home with sex and tequila on his mustache, barking why his breakfast wasn't ready. He was lucky, fortunado, bragged about the time he punched an officer only to be bailed out of jail by a woman. Once, when he upset grandma, like often, like oceans, we threatened to call immigration. But how could we, the children of immigrants ourselves? We didn't want him living in our house, at our parties, using our toilets, our hand soap. One night, he went out drinking, and our cousin crouched over a pile of clothes inside his room and pissed, an unofficial send-off. For months, his shirt collars stunk of her urine. Thank you, everybody. So excited to hear the rest of the poets. I'm just gonna fanboy for the rest of the time. Much love to everybody.
And to you too.
Is Mark with us? Thank you so much, Alan. Sorry. That was fantastic. It's so great to hear those poems in your voice. I feel like I know them by heart. And so it's so great to hear them in your voice. Thank you. Has Mark come, Ryan? Do we have Mark Doty?
I do not believe quite yet. No.
Okay. So I think we'll go on to Ed. Ed's next in
Wonderful.
In line.
There
So,
you go.
I'll say some words about Ed. Edward Hirsch, a MacArthur Fellow, has published 10 books of poems, most recently Stranger by Night, which came out in 2020, and The Living Fire, New and Selected Poems, both from Knopf. He has also published 5 prose books, among them A Poet's Glossary and How to Read a Poem and Fall in Love with Poetry. His latest book is the anthology 100 Poems to Break Your Heart, which came out in 2021, this very year. And Ed started out working summer jobs as a busboy, a soda fountain jerk, a garbage man, and a factory worker. He's currently president of the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation. So let's hear it for Ed.
Thank you, Claire.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody. Good to be with you. Claire reminded me of all the shitty jobs I've had in my life. Anyway, special congratulations to Ben and to Claire for putting together this anthology. It's really important that poetry pays attention to all kinds of different subjects, especially work. It's not all just love, death, and the changing of the seasons. It's important that poets pay attention to the jobs that people have, the kind of lives they actually live, and the incredible transfer of capital since the Reagan era, which has been one of the greatest catastrophes in American life, almost unnoticed, how so much money moved hands. And they did it in all kinds of different ways, mostly through deregulation. I'm going to begin by reading a poem that came out of my daily reading of the business section of the New York Times in the 90s. And I was teaching Wordsworth, and one of the poems kept coming back to me of his call, which has the line, "Getting and spending, we lay waste our powers." And I thought, well, he had no idea. I mean, that was just the beginning of getting and spending. But I was paying attention to suddenly all kinds of words that were popping up that I didn't know before, that were kind of an invention. It turns out the way banks were moving money around, which is, we all found out what happened to that in 2008. So this, as a poet, I thought this would be something I could contribute, was thinking about the way the language was operating. This poem is called Mergers and Acquisitions. Beyond junk bonds and oil spills, beyond the collapse of savings and loans, beyond liquidations and options on futures, beyond basket trading and expanding foreign markets, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the Standard & Poor's Stock Index, mutual funds, commodities, beyond the rising tide of debits and credits, opinion polls, falling currencies, the signs for LA Gear and Coca-Cola Classic, the signs for US Steel and General Motors, high-grade copper, municipal bonds, domestic sugar, beyond faxing collateral buildups, beyond mergers and acquisitions, leveraged buyouts, hostile takeovers, beyond the official policy on inflation and the consensus on happiness, beyond the national trends in buying and selling, getting and spending, the market stalled and the cost passed on to consumers, beyond the statistical charts on prices. There's something else that drives us, some rage or hunger, some absence smoldering like a childhood fever vaguely remembered or half perceived, some unprotected desire, greed that is both wound and knife, a failed grief, a lost radiance. This is called Cold Calls. My father was a box salesman. He sold corrugated cartons and he wouldn't retire. And increasingly they moved his desk further and further closer to the door. And in the end, they put him on what were called cold calls, which means you just called people. I mean, basically all the buyers that he knew selling cartons were no longer in position to help him or wouldn't help him. And so he was just calling people cold. And this is a kind of elegy for him. If you had watched my father, who'd been peddling boxes for 50 years, working the phones again at a common desk, if you had listened to him sweet talking the newly minted assistant buyer at Seagram's, swearing a little under his breath, if you had sweated with him on the docks of a medical supply company and heard him boasting, as I did, that he had to kiss some strange asses, if you had seen him dying out there, then you would understand why I stood at his grave on those wintry afternoons and stared at the bare, muddy trees and raved in silence to no one, to his name carved into a granite slab, cold calls, dead accounts. This poem is called Liberty Brass, sorry. I was in Queens a couple years ago, and I was going to do a poetry thing at a library, and I was early. And I went and sat down at a fast food place. And across the street was a company called Liberty Brass, and it had a rotating sign. And the sign was automatic screw machine products. And I just kept seeing the sign rotating while I was sitting there. And I was thinking about my two fathers and what they had done. Anyway, I wrote this. It's called Liberty Brass. I was sitting across from the rotating sign for the Liberty Brass Turning Company, automatic screw machine products, and brooding about our fathers, always on the make to make more money, screw machine products automatic, tender, wounded, brassy, unsystematic, free American men obsessing about margins, machine products automatic screw, selling every day of their goddamn lives to some Liberty Brass turning company, products, automatic screw machine, until they were screwed into boxes and planted in plots, paid and unpaid, automatic screw machine products. And I thought I'd read you two more poems. This is called Winber Field. It was about my first job teaching the poets in the schools in a small town in Pennsylvania called Winber, PA. And in desperation to try and connect to the kids, I brought them a poem by Wilfred Owen. I don't know why I thought it was a good idea, but it turned out to unlock something in them. And I found out that all of them had extraordinary lives in their families in the coal fields, which I hadn't known about. It's called Winber Field. I don't know why I thought it was a good idea to bring Wilfred Owen's poem on the colliery disaster of 1918 to that tiny high school class in Western Pennsylvania. But soon they were writing about smokeless coal and black seams in the ground, the terror of fire damp, the rolling mill mine disaster in Johnstown, the closing of Winber Field, the memory of standing in a wide ring around a mine shaft to watch a man emerge from the earth like a god, a father in an open cage, sailing across the sky. And this is called A Small Tribe. It's a history of my family in one long sentence. The legend of a small tribe who crossed the steppes to become Eastern European eyeglass grinders with weak eyesight, horse traders, deserters from the Russian army, peddlers, impractical merchants, men who cried at the sad stories of women in tenements, who made their mothers laugh over steaming cups of coffee at the kitchen table, social democrats who argued with anarchists and communists, Zionists who never traveled to Zion, failed businessmen who snuck into Carnegie Hall to hear Rubinstein playing Chopin, and then stood on a soapbox in Union Square shouting for justice in the Spanish Civil War, who loved used bookstores and the musty backstacks of old libraries, who started a drugstore in Rochester, or sat on his suitcase, waiting for the train to misfortune, selling shirts on Maxwell Street, asthmatics, non-assimilators whose daughters married developers who never developed, and scrap metal dealers looking for an honest advantage, a gambler who beat the house and lost everything 3 times, a box salesman who could not contain himself, a scribbler. My favorite was a daydreamer who bought a new hat every year for Passover so that he could stand outside the temple, which he refused to enter, though he loved the songs and wanted to be close to the prayers. Thanks, everybody. Congratulations, Ben and Claire, on the book. I'm proud to be part of it.
Thank you, Ed. That was terrific. Gosh, raved in silence to no one. Always like I feel that every time. It's just a great poem. All great poems. All right. So I guess for our next reader, we'll move on to Yusuf and wait until Mark comes. Yusuf Komenaka's Neon Vernacular, New and Selected Poems from Wesleyan University Press won the Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award and the Pulitzer Prize. His most recent collections of poetry include Testimony, a tribute to Charlie Parker, also from Wesleyan, and Emperor of Water Clocks from Farrar, Straus, and Giroux. His new book, Everyday Mojo of Songs of the Earth, New and Selected Poems, will appear in June. He serves as Chancellor of the Academy of American Poets from 1999 to 2005, and is currently Distinguished Senior Poet in New York University's Graduate Creative Writing Program. Please help me welcome Yusuf Komenaka.
I would like to say this is a wonderful anthology edited by Claire and Benjamin. And I realize that it relates to a subject matter that I have been engaged with all of my life, and that has to do with work and the honor that's involved in work, but also dishonor as well when it comes to the politics of money. I just start by reading my entry. A prayer for workers. Bless the woman, man, and child who honor earth by opening shine in the soil, displayed hour between dampness and dust, to plant a few seedlings and furrows, and then pray for cooling rain. Bless the fields, to catch the hunt, the wild fruit, and let no one go hungry tonight or tomorrow. Let the wind and birds seed a future ferret into villages and towns, the other side of mountains, along nameless rivers. Bless those born with hands made to work, hewn timbers and stone raised from earth and shaped in circles, who know the geometry of corners, and bless and please lever the foundation and pitch a roof so good work isn't diminished by rain. Bless the farmer who clouds in his head, who lugs baskets of dung so termites can carve their hives that hold water long after a downpour has gone across the desert and seeds sprout into a continuous greening. Bless the iridescent beetle working to hold the heavens down, to journey from moon dust to excrement. The wedge slaves 2 steps from Dickens' tenements, among a den of thieves, blind soothsayers who know shambles where migrants feather the nest of straw boss as the stone cutters' perfect profile of robber barons in granite and marble and town squares along highways paved for Hollywood. Bless souls laboring in sweatshops and each calabash dipper of water. The measure amount of pieties and dangling from promises at the mouth of the cave, the catcher of vipers at dawn, in cane breaks and flowering fields, not for the love of money, but for the bread and clabber on a thick gray slab table for the simple blessings in a small town of the storytellers drink, drunk on grog, bless the cobbler, bless the cobbler, molding leather on his oaken glass, meeting softness and give into a red shoe and a work boot, never given more to one than the other, and also the weaver with closed eyes, whose fingers played the loops and ties as if nothing else matters, daybreak to sunset, as stories of a people grow into an epic, stitched down through the ages, the outsider artist going from twined and hue, cut and tag, an ironmonger's credo of steam rising from buckets and metal dust and the clang of hammers against an anvil, and the ragtag ones, the motley crew at the end of the line, singing ballads and keeping time on a battered tin drum. The second poem was titled Cape Coast Castle. And we can see how money influences even breathing on this troubled earth. I made love to you, and it loomed there. We sat on the small veranda of the cottage and listened hours to the sea talk. I didn't have to look up to see if it was still there. For days it followed us along polluted beaches where the boys herded cows and the girls danced for the boys, to the money changer, and then to the marketplace. It went away when the ghost of my mother found me sitting beneath a plum, but it was in the van with us on the road trip to the country as we zoomed past thatched houses. It was definitely there when a few dollars exchanged hands and we were hurried past, and we were hurried through customs, past the guards. I was standing in the airport in Amsterdam, sipping a glass of red wine, half lost in Van Gogh's swarm of colors. It was there, brooding in a corner. I walked into the public toilet, thinking of W.E.B., buried in the mausoleum, and all his books and papers going to dust. And there it was, in that private moment, the same image, obscene because it was built to endure time, stronger than the houses and altars, the seeds of melon, the seeds of okra and trade winds, headed to a new world. I walked back into the throng of strangers, but it followed me. I could see the path slaves traveled, and I knew when they first saw it, all their high gods knelt on the ground. Why did I taste salt water in my mouth? We stood in line for another plane, and when the plane rose over the city, I knew it was there, crossing the Atlantic, not a feeling, but a longing. I was in a crowd again, gazing up at the vaulted cathedral ceiling of the compound. I could see the ships at dusk rising out of a lull of amazing grace, cresting the waves. The governor stood on his balcony, holding his sword, pointing to a woman in the courtyard, saying, "That one, bring me that tall, ample wench." Enslaved hands dragged her to the center. Then they threw buckets of water on her, but she tried to fight. They pinned her to the ground. She was crying. They prodded her up the steps, one step and then another. Oh yeah, she still had some fight in her, but the governor's power was absolute. He said, "There's a tyranny of a language in my fluted bones. There's a poetry on every page of the good book. There's God's work to be done in a forbidden, in a forsaken land. There's a whole tribe in this one, but I'll break them before they're in the womb, before they're conceived, before they're even thought of. Come up here. Don't be afraid. Up here to the governor's quarters. Up here where laws are made. I haven't delivered the head of Pompey or John the Baptist on a big silver tray, but I owned your past, present, and future. You're special. You're not like the others. Yes, I'll break you with fists and cat-o'-nine. I'll thoroughly break you head to feet. But sister, I'll break you most dearly with kind words. We have to think about language and its association to money, to the ideas behind greed. What troubles me is how money gets into the foundation of politics and governs us in so many different ways. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yusuf, for the poems and for those moving words. It just, that second poem, the way the poet kind of falls into history and into that brutal moment, and also the way it indicts language, incredibly moving. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next reader is Sharon Olds. Sharon has received many awards for her work, including the inaugural San Francisco Poetry Center Award, the National Book Critics Circle Award, and for her 2012 collection, Steg's Leap, the Pulitzer and T.S. Eliot Prizes. Her recent collections include Odes, which came out in 2016 from Knopf, and Arias, out in 2019. And Arias was shortlisted for the Griffin Prize. Sharon currently teaches in New York University's Graduate Creative Writing Program. Thanks, Sharon.
Thanks, Jenna. Well, my friends, we have all just been changed. Thank you, Yusuf. Thank you, thank you. I love this book. I love this book. I may have been one of the people who most needed this book, who knew least the knowledge that was in this book. And I have been just reading it over and over. And the pandemic changed my thinking, got me slightly less narcissistic and insular and what's that word? Not eligible, not intelligent, entitled. Yeah. So I see myself in the world a little better than I used to. I want to start with acknowledging that I'm reading from the land, the unceded land of the Lenape. And I would like to start with Major Jackson's poem from the book, A Brief Reflection on Torture, near the Library of Congress. Shouldering a bag of great literature, you glimpse spider silk extruding from spinnerets, spiraling into an orb above the restaurant's exit sign. Revenue questions aside, a diplomat's diamond shirt studs sparkle beside Ritzenhoff crystal, just when you recall bike riding as a child behind a laundry truck, its bouquets of lavender spraying the road. Innocuous, the lightness of transactions, exchanging cash, hands touching in meetings. Some memories are made for the hatchet's blade, but the Tunisians are rioting today, and a cable station away above the bar in slow motion, LeBron tosses chalk into the air like a spell, and suddenly you smell newly opened wads of fresh paper bills. Yours is the study of steam, or how the mind sprinklers presently irrigating. Somewhere, someone is screaming. Where now a military prison, once a cathedral of trees with signs along the road that read, Chute de Branche. Waiting for your table, the bag now feels like a century of offenses. Thank you, Major. Thank you. I just realized chute de branche, falling branches, like falling rocks. I hadn't realized that before. Major is one of my many close friends who have known so much about the world that it took me until the last year to begin to learn. I have two poems in the book. One is called Money, which I used to have a really good time reading because I read it like a jazz rip-off or riff or fuck off but I've realized, it's really the poem of the child of a capitalist family. And so I want to read this one instead, which is still marked all over with ignorance. It's called Left Wife Bop. Oh, and I want to credit Afa Michael for having, I think, invented this form, didn't he? Afa, I'm going blank. Dearest Afa, thank you for bringing us this form. Left wife bop. Suddenly I remember the small bar of gold my young husband bought and buried near our old farmhouse. During our divorce, as much hours as any Sunday dinner was, or what was called the nap, which followed it, he wanted to go to the house one last time. Please, not with her, please. And he said, all right. And I don't know why. When I figured it out later, that he'd gone to dig up his bar of gold, I didn't mind. I think the reason is how even it had been between us, how even we divided the chores, even though he was the wage earner, how evenly the bounty of pleasure fell between us. Wait, what's a bounty? Like a kidnap fee? He fell in love with her because I didn't suit him anymore, nor him me, though I could not see it, but he saw it for me. Even our playing field, we inspired in each other a generousness. And he did not give his heart to his patients, but I gave my secrets to you, dear strangers, and his too. Unlike the warbling of coming, I sang for two, uneven. Our scales of contentment went slowly askew. And when he hopped off on the ground floor and I sailed through the air, poetic justice was done. So when I think of him going with his pick and shovel to exactly where he knew the ingot was and working his way down until the air touched it and released its light, I think he was doing what I'd been doing, but I'd got a little ahead of him. He was redressing the balance. He was leading his own life. Thank you, my friends. Be well, be safe. My thanks to the poets reading tonight. My love to everyone.
Thank you, Sharon. That was wonderful. Love the bar releasing its own light. It's a great image. I'm going to introduce our next reader, Crystal Williams. A native of Detroit, Michigan, Crystal Williams is the author of 4 poetry collections, most recently the wonderful book Detroit as Barn from Lost Horse Press. Williams is an associate provost and professor of English at Boston University. She's also an advocate for diversity and equity in the arts and serves on multiple arts and culture boards. Please help me welcome Crystal.
Hello, everybody. I am so thrilled to be here. I'm during the day often am not surrounded by art anymore. And so being among you all and with my friends, these incredible poets, is such a joy. Thank you, Claire and Benjamin, for your work. I know how difficult a labor of love it is to put together an anthology. And I appreciate the work that you've put into the world on behalf of poetry. And I think Americans give us a different way of thinking about things, maybe a more important way of thinking about them. I'm going to start with a poem by a favorite poet of mine, Dorian Lux, who also is a friend and a friend of many of ours. And then I'll end with a poem of my own that I wrote for yet another friend who was on this call. This is Dorian's poem titled Waitress. When I was young and had to rise at 5 a.m., I did not look at the lamplight slicing through the blinds and say, once again, I have survived the night. I did not raise my two hands to my face and whisper, this is the miracle of my flesh. I walked toward the cold water, waiting to be released, and turned the tap so I could listen to it thrash through the rusted pipes. I cupped my palms and thought of nothing. I dressed in my blue uniform and went to work. I served the public, looked down on its balding skulls, the knitted shawls draped over its cancerous shoulders, and took its orders, wrote up or easy or scrambled or poached in the yellow pad's margins, and stabbed it through the tip of the fry cook's deadly planchette. Those days, I barely had a pulse. The manager had vodka for breakfast. The busboys hid behind the bleach boxes from the immigration cops. And the head waitress took 10% of our tips and stuffed them in her pocket with her cigarettes and lipstick. My feet hurt. I balanced the meatloaf-laden trays. Even the tips of my fingers ached. I thought of nothing except sleep, a TV set's flickering cathode gleam washing over me, baptizing my greasy body in its watery light, and money, slipping the tassel of my coin purse aside, opening the silver clasp, staring deep into that dark sacrificial abyss. What can I say about that time, those years? I leaned over the rickety balcony on my breaks, smoking my last saved butt. It was sheer bad luck when I picked up the glass coffee pot and spun around to pour another cup. All I could think as it shattered was how it was the same size and shape as the customer's head. And this is why I don't believe in accidents. The grainy dregs running like sludge down his thin tie and pinstripe shirt, like they were channels riven for just this purpose. It wasn't my fault. I know that, but what really was the hurry? I dabbed at his belly with a napkin. He didn't have a cut on him, physics, and only his earlobe was burned. But my last day there was the first day I looked up as I walked. The trees shimmering green lanterns under the Prussian blue particulate sky, sun streaming between my fingers as I waved at the bus, running, breathing hard, thinking, this is the grand phenomena of my body. This thirst is mine. This is my one and only life. And I'll end with this poem that I wrote for one of my dearest friends on the planet, A. Van Jordan, who himself is an extraordinary poet, and I think even a more extraordinary human. Most of the work that I've written, I think, has to do with social class, although I rarely come directly at it. I usually shimmer up to the side of it. And so that, I think, is what this poem does. And Claire and Benjamin, I appreciate you wanting to include this poem in this particular anthology. Thank you very much. At the Water, for A. Van Jordan from Detroit's Riverwalk. 50 feet in front of their mother, they lurch towards the dog sitting at your feet, an eruption of yeses, hands and arms like new branches twisting skyward. Their mother calls, "Don't touch that dog." And because they are good kids, smart, they heed and halt 3 feet from me as she makes her slow way towards us. All morning, I've watched some version of this birthing, what parents give and cost their children. But History is nothing more than a chronic transfer of limitations, a way of understanding who we might have been, and who we are is bodies born of shackles, water. What these children do in the moment of desire when the world offers beauty is an anchor, a shackle, forcing them to yield at the dark tongue of no, at the foot of a tenacious history circling the edges, snapping its warnings, making their mother leery of even a dying toothless poodle. And so it's always the white children who claim the dog's body, their branchy limbs and excited eyes, free of history's shadow, and Oliver is all possibility, patient and giving. Here, in the soft fur, in the yes, is where so much, perhaps everything, is lost. But then there are two brown children still standing 3 feet shy of me, bodies tremorous, humming. Their mother, her eyes the world's closed doors, moves past like a storm warning, snips, no, I said, come on. The girl is older. Already her hands have rubbed history's back. Her body turns towards the storm, but the boy's eyes move slowly, take in every bit of the dog's beautiful mountain, as if, because he understands something about his mother and sister and self, he must savor, as if he will relent to the fact of his David and their Goliath, but he will not bow. His sister grabs his hand. Their mother is getting too far away. Maybe she is 7, he 4, static for her pull and his tug. But outside of history's reach, he rallies, moves closer. His name is Oliver, I say. The boy considers me, then looks down the river walk, says quietly to his mother's dark moving back, I want to say hi to Oliver. And I am broken with imaginings, the many corner stops, ways of knowing, cops, the times this Black boy will be forced to call out his innocence intention to the world. And oh Lord, do I want him to be making himself before me, place marking this moment, deciding against the murky back of history, the keen-tongued mother, the soft-pulled sister, who he will become. It can be done, I think, but say, Oliver knows you do, baby, and on another day, you two will be great friends. He considers me again, nods, and then leaves me with those wide Black orbs, the young, quiet hands. How he grew small and small, sprinting towards the dark back of history, calling, here I come, here I come. Thank you.
Crystal, that was fantastic. That the way you excavate that moment and, keep making us aware of the border of history around it is just extraordinary in that poem. It's just chilled us when we first read it, Ben and I, and it's chilled me to hear you read it tonight. So I just want to thank everyone who's come tonight. Ryan for orchestrating this evening. Thanks so much to the poets who read, our 5 poets who read. We're so pleased and thrilled to have your work in the anthology and your essays as well. And I want to thank everyone, all of you people here who've come virtually to listen to these spectacular poems and poets tonight. We so appreciate your support of us and the anthology. And yeah, thank you and have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a great rest of your evening, everyone. It was lovely
Thanks
seeing you.
everybody for coming.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody. Bye, Yusuf. Bye, Ed. Bye, Sharon. Bye, everybody. Bye, Alan.